Chicago's #1 African music station, WGHC 98.3 FM.
I am Mazi KK Odeluga.
Mazi Ejikeme Obasi.
Na Mazi Oke Okachuku.
This is Straight Talk Radio, the world as we see.
Coming to you from WGHC 98.3 FM. Your voice, your music, your station.
Listen to us this and every Saturday at 4 to 5 p.m. U.S. Central, and this and every Tuesday at 9 to 10 p.m. U.S. Central.
Ndewono.
Hey, Mono. Hey, Sultano. Hey, Patano. Hey, Christian. Hey.
Good evening and welcome to another program. This is Straight Talk Radio, coming to you from WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station. I am Mazi Oke Okachuku. My co-hosts are on their way. Thank you for joining us again for the past 2 days, 2 shows. We've been talking about intercommunal violence, especially in the space called Nigeria, and we talked about community violence as the big and the small ones, and we decided that the small ones are things that usually happen between people because of living in a community, the conflicts and frictions that happen. But we were concentrated on what we call the big ones, which are usually in Nigeria along ethnic lines mostly, not always, sometimes along religious lines. And we talked last time to a foreigner to Nigeria. Actually, we talked to a part of the Baptist Center for Ethics, and it was Mr. Cliff Van and he produced a movie, and also that has a book companion. The movie is called The Disturbances, and it was about the experience of missionaries who were in Nigeria during the pogrom era, and this is the period after 1966 January coup, the riots and the killings and the atrocities that happened in Nigeria, especially in the north, against people from the northeast. So he joined us, and he was gracious enough to talk to us about the experiences of the interviews in the documentary that they put together. And we discussed that in details, and then after the show, we did talk about our own contribution to it and even read from the book. So if you missed that, please go back and rewatch the recorded video on Facebook. But we thank you for joining us, and we enjoy you participating and being part of the show. So to do that, you could call our studio by calling 773-942-7167. Once again, it's 773-942-7167. We would like to hear your reaction to the conversation we've been having across the table here. We would like to have it with you and actually have you also educate and inform us on the things that we don't know that we should know, or your experiences or your thoughts towards what we've been discussing, intercommunal violence. I will take this opportunity to welcome my co-host, Mazi Ejikeme Obasi. Welcome to the show. So today we're going to continue to talk about violence, not necessarily violence in the same context as intercommunal and in the space called Nigeria and the herdsmen versus farmers or ethnic or the government perpetrating a whole lot of violence on the people. Like we concluded that in the space called Nigeria, that a lot of the violence that happens is actually the government. It's government sponsored. That at the inception of the country, the Nigerian country was put together with the government being the oppressor against the citizens, and that has not changed even up to today. So today we will talk about violence as it affects us, and we will start from where we live. So we happen to be coming to you from the city of Chicago, and this city is a wonderful city. It's well known for a whole lot of things, and a lot of companies are actually moving here. So we enjoy that. But there is also something that gets mentioned a whole lot about the city of Chicago, and that is violence. And people that live in Chicago City will probably point to the south side of Chicago as where that violence is always seems to be concentrated. We know there's violence in all parts of the world. We know there's violence in all kinds of cities, but it seems to be a lot of it in the city of Chicago, especially the South Side. Mazi Obasi, any thoughts?
Well, yes. Well, first of all, South Side and the near West Side of Chicago, those are the areas that traditionally are felt to be violent areas. I think if you look at the areas we talk about where there's violence, right in those same areas, it maps very specifically to poor areas of the city. So clearly, poverty and violence go hand in hand. And therefore, I think if you start to look at violence, and you want to look at it objectively, which I think we will talk about a little later during the show, because I am a very strong proponent of treating violence like a public health problem. And if you apply scientific methodology to violence, you can have answers and ways of dealing with it that may give you good results. So for right now, I want to just say violence and poverty map out very closely.
So you're agreeing with one of the prophets, that would be Bob Marley, that a hungry man is an angry man?
Absolutely.
So since poverty seems to be, I mean, at least these areas are known to be very poor. And actually, if we think about the other cities, Baltimore, for example, which was Mother One capital for a while.
East St. Louis, Illinois.
Or South Central, LA. Or it actually, it bodes well with what you're saying. It actually supports your argument that it's poverty that breeds this violence.
Yes.
So do we know how these places came to be a concentration of poor people?
Well, I think even before we get there,
yes.
Let me point out that there are many areas around the world where you could not begin to compare the poverty in those areas to anything you see here in the United States of America. So poverty is one part of it, but I also want to point out that I think it is hopelessness, a lack of vision that things could ever change in any way. I think that's another driving principle. Yes.
So we have areas around the world where we have also a concentration of poor people.
Yes.
But not with this kind of violence.
Yes.
And you're saying it's not just that people are poor, that they're not as rich as their neighbors, that they can't always have excess or have extra. They're living paycheck paycheck if they have a paycheck, or they're living from hand to mouth if they have hands. But you're saying it's you're poor, but you don't see any way of getting out of it. You are hopeless. You're thinking this is it. Your life is just this small existence in this with nothing to give, nothing to contribute.
Yes, I think that plays a role.
Okay. So I think we've gotten down at least to one of the things is hopelessness.
Okay.
Now, why does hopelessness equate to violence?
Well, I don't necessarily think that it is hopelessness that equates to violence. I think with hopelessness, the third factor that I think needs to be put into that melting pot to give us the stew is the issue of exploitation. So if you look at poor inner city, kids without hope, you bring in a way out, drugs, buying, selling, with drugs, gangs, with gangs, turf wars, with turf wars, violence. If you really look at a lot, and I'm not saying it is all of it, but a large part of violence, in especially inner city America, has to do with the drug trade and gangs. Yes.
Okay. So I'll play devil's advocate and channel some of my non-progressive friends, if I should say that. So they'll tell you that actually it may be some of the things that you said, but they will go back and say, well, it's because the fathers in those communities have abdicated their duties,
Yes.
and the women that are supposed to play mothers there have actually even dumped the family concept and started looking after number one instead of looking after the family. So they've let the thing deteriorate. It's not just that they are poor,
Yes.
but there are no fathers in the house,
Yes.
and the mothers are trying to benefit themselves and actually even using the kids as a tool. So what do you say to that?
Okay, so so to those I ask a question: why are the fathers abdicating? Are we saying that there is something, a characteristic of inner city fathers that makes them less than fathers everywhere? Because certainly, and in the American context, when you say inner city, it is also an acronym for black.
That's right. Black
so,
and brown.
So black and brown. So we can as well as put it on the table
Yes.
right up front. Yes. You have parents of every single race that live in different parts of this country and are raising their kids perfectly. Okay?
As much as they could. Right?
Yes. So it's not a race thing. So
Right.
let's start there. It is not a race thing. If you take away, if it's not a race thing, then it must be due to factors inside there. So yes, a lot of parents are not there. This is not to in any way excuse bad behavior.
Yes.
But one has to ask the question, why are the fathers not there?
So hopelessness, not having role models, and I'll use it generally like parents or fathers that will bring some stability to the family, and even mothers that care, and the exploitation of those conditions now leads to what we are all experiencing.
Yes.
And a lot of times it seems far-fetched or far away when we talk about these violence, because it seems to happen mostly in those communities. The only times that it becomes a problem or it becomes something talked about is when it spills over past those boundaries.
Yes, and then suddenly it becomes a national crisis.
It becomes a national
There you go.
crisis, and we want to
Yes.
call in the National Guard and everybody too.
Yes.
All right. So during the last election, during the last campaign, not the election, during the last campaign, it was talked about a whole. Chicago was in the news,
Yes.
and it wasn't in the news because it's one of the greatest cities in the U.S. It was because of this particular problem of violence.
Yes.
And with a lot of promises of how to fix it. And I would like to, now that we've talked about at least what may be some of the causes,
Sure.
a lot of people talking about fixes. Do you, not that we are going to start throwing out solutions here, but
Yes.
do you think that any of those people that have said we have solutions, even if they haven't told us, or do you think that there is this magic bullet that could really, we could bring to bear and this goes away? For example, if
yes,
we decide
sure.
it's poverty and we decide, you know what, we just don't like this violence, why don't we just pay them $20,000 every year?
Yes.
Would that make it go away?
Are you going to pay me $20,000?
You don't live in that neighborhood, so.
No, I think. So let's look at it this way.
Yes.
Okay. We have urban Chicago.
Yes.
If you go and read about the history
Yes.
of low-cost housing, or like we said, the projects,
Yes.
I think it is very instructive as to why people can descend to a level of hopelessness and despair.
Yes.
There is no doubt that, first of all, there was a deliberate policy to keep people of color in certain parts of this city and prevent them from breaking out to the larger society. In line with that, there have also over time been policies that have been put in place to basically disenfranchise these populations economically. Okay? And going ahead with that, there has also been, because of, and we've talked about this in an earlier program, the perception that these are people who are inherently, quote unquote, bad.
Yes.
The policing has
redeeming
been
factor.
the policing has been very heavy-handed. So, for example, you say the men. Where are the men? Well, they're all in prison.
Yep.
They're all in prison.
They're all enrolled in the big prison.
There you go. And the question is, are they inherently more, again, quote unquote, bad than any other race?
Right.
Or is it an inherent bias in the system that does not give them a break?
Right.
So that's so.
So I want to add to what you're
Okay,
saying, because
sure.
on another show we were talking, I mean, we made reference to it that
Yes.
now that the government has come around to treating drug problem as a health issue instead
Yes.
of a crime issue.
Absolutely.
We welcome that.
Yes.
But that has been a situation in the black neighborhoods for a long while.
Absolutely.
And then how we decided to try to resolve it then was the war on drugs.
Yes.
And the war on drugs devastated the same families that were, because the one guy that is poor, desperate, couldn't get a job because people won't hire him because he looks thuggish.
Yes.
Now find somebody on the street that says if you sell these things to your own people in your own community, you get money and I'll pay you. And he figures, you know what, I can't get employed at McDonald's, or even if I get employed at McDonald's, it's not good enough to take care of my family, so I'm going to go do this. And as soon as he steps out, there's a helicopter
Yep.
flashing at him. There are about 5 cops holding him down, and he goes to in front of a magistrate who
Yes.
says, "Hey, dude, we're sending you to life imprisonment just because you have just got a bag of some
Whatever.
dust to sell somebody."
Whatever. Well,
Meanwhile,
go ahead.
the guy that sold to the guy, that sold to the other guy, that sold to the other guy, who got it from the main manufacturers outside the country,
Yep.
is living large in his
Palace,
suburban
mansion. Yes.
And at one point, if they happen to have a raid that gets him, he goes in front of the same chief magistrate, and he looks at him and says, "Shame on you. Because of what you did, I'm going to sentence you to 1 year suspended sentence and 180 months community service."
And a $2,000 fine.
Yes, and you're going to wear a monitoring stuff for. Meanwhile, the poor guy
Well,
don't get to see his family anymore.
because even though this is something that is not spoken about,
Yes.
it is a very big fact. Let me, first of all, when you talk about drug use,
Yes.
go back to the 60s, okay? Drug use was a white issue.
Right.
Psychedelic drugs was white America,
Yeah.
okay? Cocaine was white America. At that time, it was not, yes, it
There was no war on drugs.
No. It was okay, they're
It was just
hippies,
something.
they're doing their
it was
thing.
Woodstock. Yeah, it was
LSD.
hippies.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was not seen as a bad thing until it came into the inner city. And of course, they started producing cheap cocaine as crack.
Yep.
That is when we started talking about super predators, mandatory sentences.
Thanks to Mrs. Clinton.
Mrs.
Yes.
Clinton.
Yes.
Yes.
We talked about intercommunal violence, but we want to actually continue this trend, but start from where we live in Chicago. So we've been talking about violence in our communities, and to try to understand the violence, we're trying to find the roots. And we've talked about how it's poverty, it is despair, it is hopelessness, and exploitation that actually makes this crucible that from which this violence springs forward. So we're trying to figure out how this all came
How
to be.
these factors play in.
So we started talking about families and the breakdown of families, how some will say it's just that the fathers are not there or the mothers are not vigilant enough or taking care of the kids. Now we are full circle, because we looking at this and we're saying, well, part of it is there is this inherent bad perception of some of people from those black and brown communities in the first place. So they don't get jobs. And even the jobs they get are not good enough. And even when they go into the same bad behavior as other people, they get punished even more. So
And that is the American problem. You see, I call it the American problem because each time we are confronted by an issue,
Yes.
our national response depends on in whose corner or whose neighborhood is happening.
Yes.
We don't see it as an American problem. We see it as so-and-so's problem, so-and-so's problem, so-and-so's problem. Now, it becomes an American problem when it involved a certain segment of our population.
White America.
And that is then, it is too late. But we are, all of us are in the same boat.
Yes.
Because when the constitution of this country was fashioned,
Yes.
yes, it was a little exclusionary, but the organizing creed, like we say, is that all men are created what?
Equal, yes.
And endowed by their creator.
Yes.
And they didn't say, but some of these people didn't have those rights, much as the laws were interpreted differently. So what's my point? The day we wake up as a nation to treat our fellow citizens as fellow citizens, no matter what stripe or corner of town they come from, but to deal with the problem as a community. So war on drugs, lock them up was the
Mantra.
Nancy said say no to drugs, and then the other people decided they were going to
lock them up.
Say the no to you.
No.
Lock them up.
Remember, in the 90s, to be strong on law enforcement
was a thing. Yes.
you have to show that you're strong
Yes.
on law, because and then it's you got to be tough on crime.
Yes.
Yes.
Tough on crime. Okay, tough on crime meaning lock up the black people now, and you need
Black
to
and brown.
black and brown. Then go back to, and this goes back to our history.
Yes.
You see, because the perception, the thing that drives our policies is what I call the plantation community. Whatever is going on in that plantation eventually was translated into a national experience. So the Africans were deprived rights as people who were part of that same community, is what you see outside. They were not allowed to marry. I heard you talking about family.
Yes.
They weren't allowed to keep their children.
Yep.
They weren't
They were
allowed to
property.
earn income to sustain their families. And these were people who grew up in large extended families,
Yep.
who knew how families operate, who have, great-grandfathers, grandfathers, and who knew how families were run.
Yep.
And you don't see the same dysfunctional families from where they came. You ask, why is it that that it looks like they can't put a family together? No, somebody interfered with the ability to put together families.
And broke down their family.
That's right. So those same family issues that were not resolved, that were actually created by the plantation experience, is what you then came to with us to the cities. So you talk about jobs. How many people are looking for ways to make sure that our people got jobs? And then two, today, drug is a disease. In our time,
We are glad it's a disease now, but it
Yeah,
could have
well,
been a long time
that's-
ago.
that-
but during the epidemic in the inner city, it was a crime.
Yes.
And so, but again, that's what America has to learn, this lesson, so that we can go forward. As
So
a
I,
nation.
I think we're getting to where so I know last 2 weeks we quickly got to a conclusion about the Nigerian violence.
Yes.
I think we're getting close, maybe not there yet, where we're kind of thinking, where I'm beginning to think that maybe the violence in these communities is just being sprung out of somewhere. So you said exploitation. So the exploitation was the law enforcement or the criminalization of some of these things that could have been a mental health issue or
It's a public health.
health issue.
And coupled with economic disinvestment
Yes.
in all the communities. Yes.
So that created it wasn't like people were hanging out and decided, you know what, we're just going to start shooting each other.
No.
And we're going to start smoking this crack or whatever and start disrupting our community. It was, they were disenfranchised. They couldn't be able to get the kind of jobs that even they were skilled for. And even when they had a problem that was a public health issue, the government decided to punish them for daring to have a public health problem.
Yes. And if I may come in here, I was listening to a program on one of the public radio stations here, and they were discussing this issue. The presenter brought up a research that was done in the early days of drug research, something to do with animals.
Yes.
They had tried to put some animals in 2 cages. One had exclusively water.
I
The other
heard the
one
same.
had water
Sure.
laced
Yes.
with cocaine,
Yes.
with cocaine. And of course, the rat with the drug, the one exclusive water with overdosed on it.
Yes.
But then he
They put them in
rearranged
community.
He rearranged the cage such that they had a rat community.
Yes.
And left water with plain water with cocaine,
and they were
and they were not overdosing on it because they had other incentives and they had other relationships that was satisfying.
Which was so he mentioned the same another research that was part of what happened during the Vietnam Wars.
That's
because
right.
A lot of soldiers were introduced to drugs then.
That was
and America was afraid that they will come home and there will be this huge public health problem because
Yes.
all these soldiers will continue to OD on the street. But that never happened.
That's right. 95% of the people cleaned up without going to a rehab.
Yes.
Okay.
Once they reunited with their families, once they got back to doing other things that are not part of that experience that forced them into it. So my point being, so long as we do not want to invest in building communities,
As long as we continue to isolate these people
yes,
and keep them by themselves,
Yes.
then you leave them no choice.
you leave them no choice.
you know-
So we need to get back to building communities, and having giving everybody an opportunity to really participate in our community.
I'm glad we're having this conversation because just a few days ago, I was going through my old records and I played a particular song by Otis Redding,
Yes.
which was many, many years back, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay.
Yes.
And I want you
Watching
to-
time go
yeah,
by.
I just, picture yourself as that man. Nwoke,
Yes.
Iko Road, yeah.
Yes.
Ọ chọrọ ọrụ.
Yes.
He wants to do what
He's,
genetically DNA
he's disposed
says
to.
do.
Yes.
No job,
Yes.
no opportunity,
Yes.
nothing. You just sit there. You watch the ships come in, you watch the ships go out. Just wasting time. How does that man feel?
That is how hopelessness and despair
That is
creeps
the
in.
hopelessness.
Yes.
And mgbe nwoke no, you are so down that you don't see
Your
a
back is
future.
against the wall.
No future for you.
Yes.
Then you begin to drown your sorrow in either alcohol or drugs.
Those who are hurt other people, right? So if all you have in you is this venom and despair, it's gonna spill out.
Now somebody's going to accuse you of, again, here they go again. They're always looking for a handout.
Excuse. Yes.
These black people are always looking for a
Have a
handout.
chip on their shoulder.
They're always asking for a handout. What are they asking for now? No, but stop.
Yeah. When are we
Now
gonna
that we
learn?
have the opioid crisis, let's look at the way the responses have been.
Absolutely.
Investments are going into those same communities because we identified
Congress.
loneliness and
poverty.
and hopelessness.
Yes.
Is going into those communities. Two, it is not criminalized, so everybody's out of the shadows. Oh, now they are being told, oh boy, you have a problem, we can help you.
Yes.
And so there are resources being thrown around it. There are monies, there are research now.
Government is
and
providing
government is
resources
leading.
and making it a
Yes.
national crisis.
It's a national crisis.
Yes.
And it is a health problem.
It's a health
And
epidemic.
I welcome all this. It's just for some people, for so many, it was late.
Yes.
It is
Well-
way too late. A lot of them are still lavishing in prison.
Yes.
No, and then we
There
are
are
spending,
children.
and we are spending $30,000, $40,000
$60,000 to
Take care
put
of
one person in prison,
prison.
when we could have used that money to take them through all the way to high school. Actually, even college.
Yes. No.
We could have free college right
That's
now.
right. So why put the guy in prison, lock him up
Yes.
because he smoked a joint?
Oh, but excuse me.
But he looks different.
No, no,
and
no,
these
no, no,
thuggish
no, no,
people.
no,
No, I'm not saying that
I will
it
tell
is
you why.
right. It is right
I will tell you
because
why.
it's illegal. But bring him out, make him productive.
Then how
let
do
there
they-
be let
how-
there be a
Yes.
restorative nature, and I think that is something cultural, because when I look at some cultures,
I still think it's exploitation because
But
we
no,
made
yes.
if we keep going down that, we're going to go into a rabbit hole because we will get into the prison industrial complex.
That's where
We're
I
go-
was going.
Yes.
How do you
We-
get them
that's
out
an-
of prison? Then how do the private
that's another
prisons make
show. That's
money?
That's another show.
But it goes back to
That's
right where
another
we
show.
started, exploitation.
Yes.
We have to accept America is a capitalist society.
Yes.
In capitalism, the drive is to make money.
Yes.
Your drive is to make a profit. And to tell you the truth, pure capitalism has no conscience, has no morality.
Yep.
It is all about making a profit. Therefore, anything you can do to make a profit is okay, including grabbing people and locking them up
And-
so that you can
and
get
exploiting
paid.
them some more,
Absolutely.
right?
yeah.
So, violence is because of exploitation, poverty, despair, and hopelessness.
And then, can I also add,
Yes.
there is an underlying current of a culture of fear.
Okay, explain.
Now,
Wait a
this-
second before you explain. You're listening to WGHC 98.3 FM, your voice, your music, your station, and you're listening to Straight Talk Radio. If you're enjoying the show, and we do enjoy it as we discuss, we would like you to please go to our webpage, wghcfm.org, and please donate as much as you can. We're a public station, supported station, and that means we live off of your donation, which are all tax deductible. We thank you as you give. No matter how much you have and how much you give, we really, really thank you. Thank you for our communities. We have been going back, and I mean, we just like we are doing every show, we're trying to get to what we think is the root of it, because until it's tough to try to provide a solution. So
That's
we're
right.
trying to get to the bottom of it and then work our way up so that we all be on the same page by the time we get to what you may consider to be the meat. But I'm hoping that you are enjoying the discussion. To join us or to give us your opinion, please call 773-942-7167. Or if you are live on Facebook, you could enter in your comments. We are watching, and we will be able to respond and give you our feedback. So, Mazio Deluga,
yes,
you were going to say.
yes, I was going to say something about the culture
The
of
fear factor.
Yes.
You see, there's an underlying culture of fear that keeps us away from each other, that does not bring us together as one large American family.
And who are we? Because we means
All we the people.
that. Okay.
Remember that America is all about we
The
the
people.
people.
That's what it says on
Power
paper.
belongs to,
To the people. That's democracy.
We are a government of the people, by the people, for the people.
Yes.
So there is no you and there is no I.
Yes.
It's all of us.
Yes.
So if you look at all of us,
Yes.
what has been the challenge since we penned that creed, that all men are created equal,
Yes.
we have not found a way to love one another and not be afraid of one another. So our responses is based on our fear. I give you an example.
Okay.
When cocaine arrived from South America, which many of our people, explorers, everybody knew about the coca leaf, and many Americans in the colonial days go back and forth. In the South, like you said, it was an aristocratic thing, things that people saw in high class social, among the socialites.
So Coca-Cola.
That was all part of what people took and imbibed.
Yes.
All of a sudden, somebody said something. We don't want these black men to get hold of this. Otherwise, we can't control their prowess, and they will start devouring our women. They will rape our women. They will whatever.
What was this kind of like in the creation story, right? When God said, "They've eaten the apple." We don't want these people to continue to.
And within the Chicago community area,
Yes, sir.
I just want to share my contribution to the reason why.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just
turn down your radio a little bit.
Okay, all right, we'll turn it down. And I just want to contribute to the reasons why I believe there's violence in the black community.
Go ahead.
It is true that jobs are a playing factor. However, by sheer looking at the black community, and I'm going back to as far as in Africa,
Sure.
There's violence in Africa.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, and even the present day African American who's never stepped a foot into Africa, their community is just as violent as the one in Africa. I've been trying to draw the similarity and try and find out exactly why this has been so.
Yes.
And when you look at the white community in America and that of Europe, they are less violent in Europe and they're less violent in America. So why is it that Africans are violent in Africa and the African American community here are also violent?
Okay.
So this thing has to do with our inherent gene and exposing that part of it and letting the community, the black community, know that violence is not the way to resolve to anything. I mean, thank God for Facebook. Thank God for Facebook, for instance. You will see so much violence in Africa. Maybe a man got drunk, or maybe a woman was caught in adultery, and the violence on that itself is just explicit. In the white community, it's handled differently.
Thank you.
So this is the reason why I think it has been in our blood to be violent, to express. We believe that that's the best.
Let me.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Tafi. We really appreciate your call and your opinion. So we'll, Mazi or Delegate, since you want to talk to it.
The point about is there an inherent gene for violence? That I don't think that will stand to any kind of scrutiny.
Well,
Now,
wait. Let me
let me say this.
Yes.
You see, if you look at, say, oh, this is the violence in Africa, this is the violence in Europe.
Yes.
Those are not apple to apple. You got to look at, there are various situations and various circumstances that you have that.
Yes.
Now, if our people are inherently violent,
Yes.
we will not be the population that we are. We will not have enough people there. We would have started eating each other. But the issue is within the American space is far different from, like when we talked about the Nigerian space, violence within Nigeria and here. They're all different scenarios.
So let me say that perception may be reality in some
Yes.
cases, and I think it's the perception on what you read. He mentioned Facebook.
Yes.
So it's the media, right? I know my opinion, and I know a lot of people have the same opinion, that media goes for the dramatic.
That's right.
They're not reporting every good thing that is happening in Chicago. The things that make the news in Chicago at night, if you watch the news, are mostly the things that are wrong. I mean, it's depressing to watch the 9 o'clock
local
news
yes.
because they tell me about all the things going on wrong. But I know there are good things. Actually, I get invited to some of those good things that happen.
Yes.
Same thing with the larger world.
Yes.
So saying there is no violence in UK or Europe or Asia, it's not true, because I see the same news and we wonder, why is the guy in Philippines, Duarte, trying to kill everybody that he's governing?
Yes.
Or why are the Syrians not going to let people live? Why are the Israelis not going to live good with the people at the West Bank? Why would Europe go on wars, and the Romans, how did they disappear, the Greeks? So we could go back in history and see that actually conflicts exist
It's as well as
in any
proven.
community.
Yes.
There are pockets of violence that happen, but to the extreme that it happens in some communities is alarming. And that's what we're trying to look at. And I totally agree. It happens in black communities. It happens in white communities. Maybe the news media and the programs we are watching are not shining a light. I live in the northwest suburbs, and the news that happen in the northwest suburbs, a lot of them is the population that lives in the northwest, which happen to not be a lot of black.
Yes.
So I do see news, or I do see information that is about people that are not of the same skin color as I am, human beings as I am, have the same kind of issues as the same people, as
That's
people
right.
that have the same. So it is a balance of media.
Yes.
Even beyond that,
Yes.
I want to point out something. And again, I thank the caller for calling in, because
thank
this
you.
is what generates discussion.
Yes.
And like we say in this show, we're all learning. So we're all in this journey together. So there is no right or wrong. We talk about issues and try to come to a way to educate ourselves.
Yes.
So my point in this is actually to say, don't be fooled by what you see on YouTube, on WhatsApp, Facebook, because those things are geared towards your community. So you see things that are brought up from your community, and sometimes we have the inherent, we have a way of taking our little space and generalizing it to the whole world.
Yes.
If you want to look at violence as violence, let me point out to you, first and foremost, countries in South America that are extremely violent, that have driven a lot of the migration,
Immigration
the children
that happens
that are
in the
being
US.
put on trains and moved through Mexico.
People
It's
trying to
because of
escape.
violence, escaping violence in their countries. Now, when we talk about
same
white people, we tend to look at Western
the
Europe,
picture we see of the
Western
models on
Europe,
the-
Canada, and but go to some of the Caucasus. Let us remember Serbia, Croatia, Macedonia,
Kosovo.
Montenegro, Kosovo. There was violence in large scale. Even today, Albania.
Yes.
All these places, there
But
is
we're-
a lot of violence.
And people may actually confuse it and say, well, you're talking about wars. We're talking about the ones that happen inside community.
Yes.
If you look deep enough, if you're from those areas, you probably understand what we're talking about, because even within those communities, there is violence that is living with them, even in those small communities, not the large scale that we always hear about.
Yes.
Yes.
So violence is universal. And I think if you really want to draw parallels, two things I want to say.
Yes.
There is still a correlation between economic opportunity and violence.
Yes.
That's number one. A lot of Western Europe, they are economically in a better place, have been. So degree of violence is lessened. And the second thing I want to point out, if you are drawing parallels between African American population and Africans living in Africa, well, you are lumping every single black person in America under that group of violence. There are a lot of families that do not live in the inner city.
Even black and brown neighborhoods that don't have the same kind
And
of
they
problem.
do not have any violence.
That's right.
They have little or no violence.
That's right.
So
In the deep south,
yes, absolutely.
all over the south.
Yes. So that in itself is fallacy. What we see is what Mazi Oke referred to, over-reporting of
dramatic.
of
It's
what
what
is
sells.
dramatic in
Yes,
America.
yes.
So I think I would like you to look a little deeper into it, and you will find. And the final thing I will say to you, because I suspect you may have African ancestry, go and ask your parents and older people within your community how communities used to live prior to this globalization.
Yes.
Because a lot of African communities were peaceful.
Yes.
And I would like to also say a lot of African communities are still peaceful. The
very
ones we
peaceful.
hear about are the noisy ones.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And so, going back to my thesis of
Yes.
culture of fear.
Yes.
You see, is that fear that separates us from one another. So that does not allow me to understand your issues or what's going on with you.
Yes.
And so when solutions are crafted, it is based on my perception of what I perceive to be the problem. Now, it's interesting that there was a study that came out this week that looked at the African American, how well the African Americans were doing 1968 compared to now. the same level of poverty, the same indices. Nothing have changed in almost 50 years.
Yes.
And the question you ask yourself, America have changed in many ways. Civil rights has happened, equal opportunity in employment, desegregation of schools, desegregation of housing, yet
we have not been able to lift
That's
them
right.
as a community out of
yes. So the gaps are still there in the finance.
Widening.
Wealth gap is widening.
Yes.
Education gap is widening. So the health disparities are happening. So you see, this is where I say, if a neighbor is a neighbor, if we do not have this culture of fear, we would have come together as one large family to begin to look at it. But I say that this culture began when we dwelled in segregated places.
So,
and again, that is actually what is spurring this acquisition, the need for people to protect themselves.
Now, we have 9 minutes, and I want to leap forward a little bit, right?
Okay.
Because sometimes it seems like we're doing theory, and I know when my brother Barack ran, they were telling him that he's professorial in some of the stuff because he talks at this level. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit, which is recently in the U.S.
Yes,
we had a lot of uprising from people down south in Florida, especially the young kids, saying, hey, we need something to change because we see some kind of violence happening over and over again, and it was school shooting.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's different than where we started about what begets violence, and if we look deeper at that, in that, we may actually find another source of violence. But I want to talk at this level of people because you started talking about coming together, being a community.
Yes.
But this is a community that's rising up. Just one small space in Florida saying, hey, this shooting, something has to be done. I want to actually talk about that part of, do we understand the problem really? And because we need to understand the problem to get to a solution, and we only have, I think I talked 2 minutes in, so we only have about 7 minutes left. What do you think? What happened in Florida, and how do we get to where we start listening?
What happened in Florida is that we failed our children as a nation. That one of the children had access to weapons of mass destruction.
Whoa.
And walked in
and used it.
So you're saying we went to Iraq to get rid of weapons of mass destruction from Saddam, but we're allowing our kids to have access to them?
That's right. Anything that can do mass damage is called weapon of mass destruction. Isn't that English?
That's right.
It doesn't have to be a nuclear weapon. It doesn't have to be a bomb. It has to be any weapon, any...
You're going to overflood you're going to overflood the calls, because a lot of people are going to call you and say, look, in the Bill of Rights, my Second Amendment says I could have what you are calling a weapon of mass destruction.
Okay, good.
So you're misleading.
So let's go to Second Amendment.
Yes.
Second Amendment, the author of that Second Amendment is James Madison.
Yes.
By the way, his grandfather, Ambrose Jackson Madison, was a slave owner, of course, in Virginia.
Yes.
So if you want to know about their story, you can read The Igbos of Virginia by Mother at Monte
You're not
Pilot.
saying that disqualifies him. You're just giving a background. Okay. Right.
He's known as the father of the Constitution.
Yes.
So what was the reason for the Second Amendment?
Yes.
It was at a time that we had militia, and the militia was
the country wasn't well formed yet.
It's not country wasn't well formed. We had what we had back home in Africa. The community raises an army as the need arises. We had no standing army.
Yes.
So every male adult served in the militia all his adult life.
So
therefore, you were allowed to carry a gun.
The country can't stop you from
You carry a gun to go home. 2, you had to defend your property and your abode. Again, remember, those were the frontier days. You had the Indians on the other side. And of course, in the South, you had the Africans in the slave quarters. So some people who had guns had to have guns because that was what gave them the confidence and the sense of security in that time. So, but Revolutionary War, the militia played a very important role in fighting against Great Britain. So these militias were formed to fight Britain. So now we got our own country. After the Revolutionary War, we're now trying to clean things up. We got a constitution. So some of the federalists, who are the people kind of like arguing for big government, believe that it should be regulated, that we now have to form an army. So, but there were people who were afraid that Washington is trying to be a king. So they called themselves the anti-federalists, who believed in states' rights.
Yes.
The ability of the states to continue to keep the militia, to defend themselves against this big government.
The big center.
And so James Madison, when he got to the Congress, had to now come up with these bills of the amendment, the amendments to correct, to make sure that everybody,
to get everybody
feels safe. So that is why the Second Amendment says that the right that a well-regulated militia, being necessary for the defense against the state.
We forget that. We forget how it starts.
Individuals, the right to bear arms, to bear and keep arms, shall not be infringed on. So that was within the context of
so there was a context.
The militia. So think about it. If I want to now have an AR-15, what will an AR-15 do against a federal government that has tanks, that has missiles, that have
it will sound
nuclear
to me like
weapons?
you're proposing I get a nuclear weapon then.
Well, that's right. That's what everybody needs to go get.
Actually,
I have a right to actually own a nuclear weapon.
If you interpret the amendment, that's what it means. If you really want to follow it to its real intent, then it means that all of us should go out, buy anti-tank weapons, buy anti-aircraft weapons. In fact, pack a F-16 in your garage.
That's right.
Just in case.
Okay, so because we're coming to the end, we're going to suspend you because this discussion is only starting, right?
Yeah, we can continue.
We will continue it next time. I'm sorry we have to do this to you, but we gotta say goodbye for today. We'll do a few closing statements, but don't go too far because on Tuesday, 9 p.m. Central Time, we will come back to you, and on that Tuesday we'll have a special guest with us. And we will talk about particular kind of violence. And if you are Nigerian or think like things Nigerians or are in the news and want to know more about Nigeria, especially with this Boko Haram and kidnap of schoolgirls and the violence that comes with it, please join us because we will discuss that with our guests. And then we will continue a program that actually talks more about this kind of violence, and we will look at the Second Amendment and try to come to a conclusion about where do we get our nuclear weapons from and our F-16s and all that stuff. So, Mazi Odeluga, as we close, what do you say in this suspended conversation?
The challenge has always been and will remain our ability as people, we the people, choosing to live true to the creed to which our forefathers had called us to live as a nation. All men created equal and endowed by their Creator. So let's be a community and not be afraid of each other, but work with each other to heal one another.
Mazi Obasi.
It's a shame that time is very short because there were a lot of other forms of violence that I know we will talk about down the road. This is just a segment of what ails our society, and hopefully there'll be time to talk about a lot of other things. But at the end of the day, I echo exactly what Mazi Odeluga has said. We have to, as a nation, decide, are we one or are we not one? Yes.
And for me, so I will leave you with what Chukwuma Ogbonna used to say to Ndibo, which is so think about that.
Interpret that.
It just means that the way we live makes it seem like, we live such a stupendous, we live so stupendously as if this life is it. So let's think about that, and then we'll catch you up on Tuesday. Catch your phone.
Catch your phone.
You're listening to WGHC 98.3 FM.
But we are nothing's friend from the